Evening, everybody. Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Corporate Policy Development Committee. My name is Councillor George Courtauld and I'm the chairman of this committee. We will now go through a few items of housekeeping. We are not expecting a fire alarm this evening, but should one sound, please can members use the exit to the rear of the chamber and assemble in the car park. Please can you make sure that your telephones and devices are switched to silent. If members wish to speak during our debates this evening, please can you indicate by raising your hand and I will come to you at the appropriate time. Please can I remind everyone to use their microphones when speaking and to switch them off when they finish speaking. Can I also remind you that this meeting is being webcasted. Thank you. Members, you will be aware that we have 3 items of business to get through this evening and that we are restricted by a 3-hour time limit for the meeting. While questions are encouraged, I would kindly ask that those raised are kept succinct and to the point, to allow sufficient time for each item to be examined thoroughly. To that end, I will use my discretion as chairman to bring the debates to a close tonight if we are short on time. So please do bear this in mind. Thank you in advance for your cooperation on these matters. I will now proceed with the main business of the meeting. Agenda item number 1, apologies for absence. We have received apologies from the following members: Councillor Mark Alt, Councillor Malcolm Finken, Councillor John Hayes, Councillor Sindhu Rajiv, Councillor Toby Williams, Councillor Ethan Williams, Councillor Billy Taylor. Are there any further apologies?
Chairman, there are no further apologies. Thank you.
I will now proceed with agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Do members have any disclosable pecuniary interest, other pecuniary interest or non-pecuniary interest that they wish to declare this evening? Please state the item and nature of your interest. Councillor Thargett.
I think I should declare I'm an Essex County Council councillor, and I have campaigned against the waste incinerator. And I know waste is on the agenda, but it's to do with Braintree District and it's for noting, so I think I can stay. And I've just got a few comments to make rather than object or anything. So if that's okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Thargett. Any? Councillor Staines.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm a director of PAIN, Parishes Against the Incinerator. We're a campaign group against the Rivenall incinerator.
Thank you, Councillor Staines. Oh, yes.
Chairman, obviously I don't intend taking any part in it whatsoever, but just to declare that I'm here at the table and I am an Essex County Councillor as well. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no more declarations, I'll proceed to item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. Members, we're asked to approve the minutes of the meeting which took place on the 11th of October 2023. Please can I have a proposer to approve the minutes? Councillor Jeffers, thank you. And I think I need a seconder, please. Thank you, Councillor Edwards. All those in favour? Yeah. Okay, fine.
Just to clarify, you can still vote even if you weren't there in attendance. But that's fine as well. Thank you.
So now I sign these. Agenda item 4, public question time. Members, as we have no registered speakers for this evening's meeting, I'll proceed with the next item of business, which is agenda item 5, review of the draft household waste and collections policy. Members, the report before you this evening is set out on pages 5 to 27 of the agenda. Please can I welcome Paul Partridge, Head of Operations, and Samia Pandya, Operations Strategy and Policy Manager, to the meeting. They will be providing members with an overview of the draft household waste and collections policy. Paul, unless you have any questions first, I would like to invite you to begin with your presentation. Members, we will take questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. I thought it would be helpful if I briefly provided members with some context and background to the household waste and recycling policy this evening. Over the past 5 years, we have seen substantial changes in the national waste policy and legislation that will affect how waste is managed now and in the future. It includes the Resources and Waste Strategy for England, the Environment Act, the Waste Management Plan, and Simpler Recycling that has actually replaced the government's consistency in household waste collections. The actual legislation includes some ambitious and quite stretching targets for reducing waste and increasing recycling. For example, the government have set a recycling rate of 65% by 2035 and no more than 10% of household waste being sent to landfill. In addition to this, at the end of last month, the sort of government announced their proposals around simpler recycling that's going to require us as a council to collect six waste streams, including glass, metal, plastic, paper and card, and food waste from the curbside of all properties, including flats, from March 2026. Interestingly, the legislation also applies to businesses in terms of the separate collection of waste from actually a year earlier, March 2025. The extent in which obviously we as a council will need to review our collection methodology is something that we will need to be looking at over the coming months and obviously discuss with members in terms of the way forward, and also as we wait further information guidance from the government in terms of the actual legislation. Interestingly, the government plan to consult on the frequency of the residual waste element of household waste, which is that waste that cannot be recycled. At the moment, members will be aware that we provide a fortnightly residual waste collection service. The government have mandated that it should be a minimum of fortnightly, but they are going to consult as to whether it should be more frequent, which to some extent goes against the principle of trying to drive down the amount of residual waste that's generated by councils whilst trying to maximise recycling. So it will certainly be interesting to see how that sort of pans out. Excuse me. In terms of direction of travel, the government's approach is to really move towards a more circular economy, which is basically aimed at reducing the amount of waste that households produce and keeping products and some materials in use for as long as possible. It really sort of maximises the resources and is helping to achieve their own the government's own targets of zero emissions by 2050. And obviously members will be aware that we've got our own carbon target of being carbon neutral by 2030 as well. So I don't think anybody can argue with the principle of what the legislature is trying to achieve in terms of driving down the amount of residual waste, and you'll see that's reflected in the household waste recycling policy that you'll be reviewing this evening, and obviously it will contribute to the local environment and as well as obviously climate change. One of the other key drivers behind the policy is really the draft waste strategy for Essex. I won't go through all of the detail there, but over the past 18 months or so, Braintree District Council, in conjunction with other Essex sort of city, borough and district councils and Essex County Council, have been working on updating the Essex Waste Strategy. The existing strategy is sort of 15 years old now, and it's effectively not fit for purpose because obviously the legislation and things have moved on quite considerably, technology's moved on as well. And the new strategy essentially sets out a framework, if you like, for how waste is going to be managed from now through to 2054. And I think within the partnership, we recognise that we need to rethink as partners how we actually collect waste and how waste is processed to be able to meet both the national and sort of proposed local targets going forward. So essentially, within the draft waste strategy that's currently being consulted on, that commenced in September and is due to close, I think, this month. And then it will come back to the County Council and then to the various partners to consider. And the intention is then that the individual councils will be asked to formally consider and adopt the strategy probably in the summer of 2024. But as you'll see from the slide, that there are quite some again, ambitious and stretching targets in terms of, for the county, looking to reduce half the amount of residual waste that we produce per person by 2042, reducing waste by 10% by 2030, aspiring to be a zero waste county by 2055, and recycling 65% of waste by 2035, and aiming to try and achieve 70% if that's possible by 2030. And again, you'll see from the in terms of our household waste policy, the importance of why we've updated the policy to reflect the fact that we need to drive down the amount of residual waste and maximise recycling. Just a couple of slides that I wanted to finish with. This is this shows how Braintree District Council has performed in terms of recycling over the last sort of 15 years or so. And you'll see that from 2009-10, what the trajectory is over the last 15 years, and that we have sort of almost plateaued in terms of our recycling performance, going from like sort of 53.57 in 2011, and then going up slightly and then dropping off, albeit that at the moment we're projecting at 2024 54.01%. But you'll see that the years prior to that, we have struggled to hit 50% against the aspirational target we have of 60%. And obviously the important thing for us is to actually try and increase the amount of waste that we can recycle to push that figure up in line with whatever the targets are that we finally agree once the new strategy is adopted by the council next year. And then finally, just another slide is this actually shows the kilograms of waste per household. And you'll see that, again, it's been fairly constant over the past sort of 15 years or so. Whilst we anticipated there would be an increase in the amount of waste that's produced, particularly with property growth, we would have expected to have seen a reduction in the amount of residual waste as in fact we recycle more. But obviously the two go hand in glove in terms of the more residual waste you have, the less you recycle. And obviously our aim here in terms of part of the new policy is to move it the other way so that we reduce the amount of residual waste and actually increase the amount we recycle. That's the end of my presentation, and before I hand over to Samir, who's going to take you through the report itself, I'm happy to answer any questions that members may have.
Councillor Edwards.
Thank you very much for that, Paul. That was actually very interesting. Just a couple of questions. So I think on one of the slides it said 54% of our waste is currently recycled. Would you be able to break down the other 46% as to what we do with that currently?
Yeah, so essentially that goes to landfill at the moment. Obviously, we're Braintree District Council is the Waste Collection Authority. The responsibility for the disposal of the waste is Essex County Council as the disposal authority, and currently we take that waste to landfill at Colchester.
Have you finished?
No, that was more. That's okay. Okay, right. Cool, fantastic. Thank you very much for that. Just on the 6 waste streams that you're going to have to collect curbside, I mean, that sounds like quite a number given. So I'm just trying to work out how that happens. So is that 6 separate bins that we're going to have, or is that, we continue putting it in the same recycling sack and you have to sort them into 6 waste streams when they get to the processing facility?
In effect, no. The government have indicated they will allow an element of commingling. At the moment, obviously, we collect all our dry mixed recycling in a single sack. What the government have said is that they will allow 2 waste streams to be collected separately, but we obviously we haven't got the full guidance from DEFRA yet. and part of the discussion that we need to have is to whether in fact they will allow us to continue commingling the waste if that's what indeed members decide going forward. So we really need to wait for that guidance and that it's very clear that what the government are trying to do is to improve the quality of material that can be recycled, and some of the feedback that other local authorities provided who commingle have been able to demonstrate, including ourselves, that our quality of material is exceptionally high, and therefore in theory you don't need to actually separate the amount of waste up considerably to actually deliver the quality that can then be reprocessed and sold on.
Okay, thank you very much. Commingling, just for a layman, I assume that's a bit of glass and a bit of cardboard, and you sort it out at your end rather than us sorting it out at our end.
Yeah, essentially, yes. At the moment, we have a single sack, and all of the dry mix recycling goes in there, with the exception of glass. So the paper card, plastic cans, it then gets taken to a material recycling facility in Suffolk and is reprocessed as part of a partnership that we have with Suffolk County Council. What the government have indicated is that glass has to be collected at the curbside, and that's an anomaly for us because at the moment we have a bring bank system which is well used, and again that's a conversation that we need to have with DEFRA around whether they will permit any of those 6 material streams from continue to be collected from bring banks rather than the curbside. But if not, then we'll need to consider how we would collect glass as part of the other recyclable material.
Fantastic, thank you. And just one quick final question. In the agenda, I noticed quite extraordinarily we produce, or the average Manchester District Council household produces 100 kilograms more waste than Colchester, and I just wondered if you could perhaps speak to that as to why what the council believes is sort of going wrong there, why we are 100 kilograms heavier than Colchester.
If it's okay, Chairman, if I could leave that to somebody to pick up as part of his presentation, then we can.
Anyone else have a question?
I've got some questions about that to do with the report. So.
Could I ask a question, Paul? Or 2 questions, actually. One sort of mildly technical and possibly a bit thick. But when we're talking about landfill, but we're talking about waste as tonnage rather than space, presumably the volume is quite important when you're doing landfill because the hole can only be so large. So is everything just compressed? And I mean, the type of waste presumably dictates how much goes in the hole, or am I being thick?
No, obviously when we collect the residual waste, it gets compacted in the back of the refuse vehicle anyway through the mechanism of the hopper, and then it gets taken to landfill. I think we all recognise that landfill is running out, and it's not sustainable in this day and age to be landfilling waste, which is obviously why the county council are looking at alternative measures in terms of how they treat waste. But essentially, it goes off to the landfill, it gets tipped onto the site, and then obviously is then covered up by the vehicles that are there to that. But it's not something that is sustainable indefinitely, and particularly in this day and age with climate change, the environment, something needs to change. But at the moment, in the absence of having an alternative facility, the county council disposal authority have got no option but to continue to landfill it.
My second question sort of relates to that, which is that one of the topics this committee decided to discuss was communication between the council and the residents, and I got involved with a school in my ward, or very near my ward recently, and a lot of the older children were saying they didn't bother to recycle because everything went to landfill. So at home they chucked everything in their black bins. And I was wondering, it would be nice if that were disproved, if there was some way the children or the people who are not bothering to recycle, because weirdly other children are totally fanatical about it. There seemed to be quite a big split. If that could be disproved, that one could say, actually, look, it is being sorted, because a lot of the children, and in fact some of the teachers said, oh yeah, there isn't enough landfill. They just take our cardboard and chuck it in the a landfill, which is, and I'm just thinking if one could see the journey somehow without disgusting everybody, it would be helpful, because it is surprising how many people just can't be bothered. You know, who just gaily chuck a tin in their black bin, or even a bottle, a glass bottle. Sorry, that's not really a question, but what can we do about it?
I'm looking at Sam, but I think our waste minimisation and recycling team would be more than happy to go to any school within our district, and they've done a number of road shows at schools and also in some of the public places, George Yard and Houston and Whittam, and to actually talk to people about recycling, including sort of videos. So, I mean, certainly if any members have got contacts with schools and they would like us to attend an assembly, more than happy to arrange that.
Thank you. Obviously, Councillor Staines, a question.
Yeah, more of a point of clarification, really. I think the way that this is currently drafted is that the streaming of waste is done at the point of consumption. Nothing is, once it's in the appropriate bag or inappropriate bag, it doesn't get touched again. So I know Councillor Edwards was saying there's some sort of sorting. If it's in dry waste, there might be some magnets which take the tins out, but there's nothing in there going through the black bin bag to say that a proportion of that could be recycled. There's nothing. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, that's correct, and that's why residual waste or figure is quite high, because obviously there's a lot of waste that potentially could be recycled that is going into the residual bin, the black bin, and it does mean, I mean, that effectively the culture needs to change, you know, across with not just our residents but other residents as well, to actually recycle more of their waste. I mean, we've got some very, I mean, we're hitting sort of 50+%, so you know our residents are doing very well in terms of the amount of waste that we recycle, but that figure could be a lot higher if residents actually ensured, you know, that they didn't put any waste that could be recycled into the residual bin. It goes into their sack so that it can be recycled.
I'm just very conscious that other folks, including UK Without Incineration, have done some grubby, rolling the sleeves up, digging through the bags, and come up with some data that says potentially up to 75+% of material, albeit some is readily recyclable, could go in a dry, but not so easy to recycle, and then your residual piece left at the end. And I think this comes back to Councillor Courtault's point about the communications. If we can really be smart about some of that data, and if your guys are doing essentially smaller trips, that data could sit and be passed back to either the parish or even the route that goes on, with a smiley face saying, yeah, you're green, smiley face, you've done really well, a slightly angry face, you could do better, and then send in the teams for the education, because you know, unfortunately it's not going to get touched again. It's just going to go either in a burner or in the ground. So
yeah, I mean, as we're members of the Essex Waste Partnership, along with other Essex councils, and in the past we have done something known as the waste composition analysis, which is literally where we engage come in, they tip the bin out, they search through the waste and actually work out exactly what proportion of that waste is at the different material streams and what could have been recycled. And it's something that the Essex Waste Management Partnership have spoken about starting up again, in terms of bringing somebody in to do that, because that actually is used then to inform our comms and media plans, you know, going forward in terms of how we target the key messages.
Councillor Thorogood.
So yeah, I was going to wait to report that this is sort of the subject that I was going to ask about. It's on 3.3 on page 6. It says some of the recycling, I guess it's the bags, some of the bags contain contaminants, and that means whole lorries have been rejected to high levels of contamination. I'm assuming that the rejection is by, is it Great Blakenham, would that be? Because that's where the recycling, I believe our recycling goes, and then it's sorted out, and anything which is rejected goes off to the incinerator next door. Now, obviously, I I was part of a group that went in the last council. We had a visit there, and I think that would be a very good idea, as was alluded to have more of those visits to Great Blakeney, because it was a real eye opener to see how it was sorted. We were only shown the recycling element, but we were shown like contaminants. I mean, there was like one bag that had a blanket in it and stuff like that. I mean, but if there's a milk carton with mould, expensively clean, that could be contaminant. But also, which I think people aren't aware of, shredded paper is not recycled. And most people, or a lot of people, not everyone, but a lot of people shred their paper, put it in the recycling, and that's going to get rejected. So if that means a whole lorry load could be rejected, then it's going to go off to the incinerator. I know you do put out material to say what can and cannot be recycled, but I speak to so many people who still don't know that certain things cannot be recycled. And I just think we need to just be more on the front foot about educating people. The group that you said about going to the school, I went with one of the ladies, I can't remember the name now, of the officer. We went to the Kelvedon WI, did a talk there, and that was a really great talk. And I thought, yeah, if they could do a road show and go around all the villages or the towns to tell people what could be done, it would be really worthwhile. But we just need to, really tell people what can and cannot be recycled. Including like certain plastics, you can take them to the supermarket. That stuff that like the bag that bread comes in, can't recycle it in the clear sacks, but you can take it to the supermarkets and things like that. So we just need better education. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Jeffries.
Actually, Councillor Thorogood has said almost what I was going to say. And I was going to wait as well, but one of the frustrating things for me, it's not really a question, I'm afraid, but you do a lot of the plastics and things that you get from the supermarket that you think this can go in the recycling, it's plastic. When you actually read the small print, like you said, it says it can't be recycled at home. Now, I take quite a lot of notice of that, but I'm sure quite a lot of people don't, that they just stick it in the bin expecting that you can take it. And I don't know how, when you sort it, you actually can work out which bits can be recycled and which bits can't. So it's an amazing job that you all do, really.
Thank you. I mean, it is a dilemma, I think, for sort of most residents. I mean, the government have mandated that plastic film is going to have to be collected at the curbside from 2027. But obviously another feedback that local authorities are given is whether the technology is available within the industry to be able to receive and process that material going forward. But and I think we recognise that contamination levels have increased over the years, and I think there's a specific problem with some of the flats that we collect from, not so much the sort of bungalows and normal houses, but certainly from flats is something that we will need to look at as part of our plan going forward in terms of how we can work with local residents and management companies in the flats to make sure that the quality material they put out for recycling is that can be recycled rather than it being contaminated.
So people could actually, you're picking up the recycled bags, the clear bags, and people are thinking that they are actually being very good and recycling, but in actual fact, what you're collecting is not suitable.
No, I think in the main, if you look at it, we're 54% is what we're currently recycling in 23-24, which I think for most authorities is a good performance. But we do accept that some residents will be putting items in their waste that do count as contamination. But that's really what we need to target. And indeed, one of the reasons why the government originally came up with the concept of having 7 different bins, so that you only put the waste that can be recycled in each bin. But obviously, they've moved away from that now. One of the things that we with our clear recycling sack, the reason we've always used clear recycling sack is because our operational crews can see what's in it, and we do sticker. And we will leave waste if it is contaminated, but we have to accept a proportion of that does get into the load, but that doesn't mean to say that the whole load gets rejected. It depends upon what the percentage is of the contaminated waste once it's received at the recycling centre. And in the main, most of it does tend to go through, and obviously we then sort of sell that on in terms of the income that's raised from the material.
Paul, can I ask one more question? Actually, as I'm chairman, I insist on asking one more question. Having sort of rowdy children staying at home with their friends, I've been put in charge of recycling, and some of them take it incredibly seriously. And it's rather, I've lost my little bit of paper that has pictures of what needs to be recycled. And I was just thinking, if the recycling bags had printed on them, because they already have something printed on them, I never bothered to read it, but I think if they just had what you can recycle, and especially if the technology, if we're looking out to 2054, and the technology changes and the law changes and the ambition changes, it would be, rather than having to go on your computer and work out, can I recycle this cheesecake dish, or whatever it is, if you could just look on your recent clear bag, it would be rather, I mean, I'm just staggering out in the freezing cold in a dressing gown, trying to get it all done because you forgot to do it the night before. It would be so simple if it was just all on the flipping recycling bag, wouldn't it? I mean,
we have used to do that in the past. Every year when we ordered our sacks, it had the do's and don'ts. You know, yes please or no thank you. And what we find after time is that some residents unfortunately don't tend to look at what's on the sack. They just put their waste in thinking, oh, I can recycle that. Not necessarily through perhaps naivety, but not realising that some of the material can't be recycled, as Councillor Jeff was referring to earlier. The other thing, of course, about the single-use plastic sack, something that we will need to talk to members about going forward, because obviously if there is a requirement to collect glass as part of the curbside, then there's no guarantee that obviously we will continue with a clear sack going forward, because obviously that in itself has health and safety implications. So we will need to look at what other receptacles or containers might be available that we can use.
thank you. Has everyone asked a question that they wanted to ask? In which case, Samir, can we move on to you?
Sure. Thank you, Chairman. I think my thunder's been stolen.
Apologies for that.
Which I don't mind, because most of the stuff that I was going to say, and it was only going to be a few lines really, was to bring out from the report the main issues that Paul's slides have covered. And really in section 3, I was going to say that hopefully members have noted parts in section 3, including that, the last time we updated our service standards was in 2014. That's a while ago. Time has moved on, the world has changed, and there's a list there. I won't go through the list. There's a list there of the things that have happened in the intervening subsequent years. We've also said in the report that a draft policy captures long established practices for delivery of our waste management service. And the new proposal of the 3 points you've got there, the cessation of collection of side waste is critical. If we're going to improve our recycling performance, drive down, these are all the things that I think you've just been discussing, and drive down the cost of collection and disposal of waste across the partnership, it has several different several benefits, not least a financial one for the Essex taxpayer. This is particularly important, I would suggest, in the present climate where we're having to do more with less funding, which also there's pressures on us which are global and national, which we don't have control over. So to be able to make the best use of what we have is important. Councillor Edwards talked about the example, the Colchester example, and I was going to bring that out. That's in paragraph 3.6 in the report. And when you make that comparison, it's you can see that it doesn't put us in a good light. And we think that a big part of that is because we've been quite with side waste, as we call it, we've been quite generous and not followed up, and we've been softer, shall we say, than some of our other partners who take a harder line on it. And therefore, we produce more waste, and there's no incentive, if you like, for our residents to do otherwise. So I think we need to have that robustness there to be able to say, look, the world's changing, we want to make it better, and part and parcel of that is we want to reduce the waste stream from all of our households. Now, the 463 versus the 332 kilograms is quite stark. Last year, I think it says also in the report, just to bring out even more, we were fourth highest in the volume of residual waste in Essex. So, that's not something that we can really be proud of, but it's something that we were working towards to make better. And I think that this policy helps towards that goal. I think that's probably it in terms of the discussions you've already had. But yeah, if there's anything else that you want to cover from the actual report.
Thank you. I think there is. Councillor Staines.
Thank you. Solid waste. Don't collect it. We meet all our targets. Where's it going to go, Samir? It's going to go all over the streets. It's going to go in bonfires. It's going to be not recycled. No one's going to care. There's a big issue here, and I think there's a balance between cost and convenience and surety. So if we're all about cost, driving down stuff, burning it because it's less than landfill, making it difficult to book into the recycling centre, all that sort of stuff. Charging for green bins will be another one. I'm sure Cam will say in a minute. But side waste, I really, if it's being collected and the convenience is there, it's being taken away and at least it's being treated. Yes, you can put a sticker on it. Yes, you can talk to people about it. But the other one I'm just thinking about, I've left it on my printer today, but could we pre-book a bag collection? So I've got a bin. My bin is full. It's Christmas. The kids all came around and they all bought stuff from China. So there's loads of plastic everywhere. Really bad. I've told them all off, but I've still got a load of waste. So I've got my black bin being collected, but I've also got 2 bags of side waste that I can't do anything about. I want to do the right thing. I've been through it. I don't want the guys to not collect it. Can I pre-book that gets taken away? And that could be a £5 a go or whatever it is a go. So I would ask, perhaps as part of one of our recommendations from this group, that we think about that as well, because that would be an incentive, but it would also prevent the whole lot being scattered around up and down the streets and kicked around forever. That was just an idea. The other one I think is really super vital, and I'm going to have a pop at one of your slides, Paul. But they're all the same colour, right? So all the bands, so whether it was green recycling, whether it was green recycling and dry recycling, it all seems to get bundled together, and we need data that can be split out. So if we start to say our recycling numbers have gone up because we're collecting more green waste, that's not right either. We need to be targeting specific streams of waste. So if it's dry recycling and it's gone up, we measure that. If it's green waste and it goes up and we've targeted it, we should be able to follow that through as well. And similarly, if we're collecting less black bin waste because people are doing the right thing, that's fantastic. But if we don't measure each stream, we're never really going to know if we're doing anything or the actions that we're proposing to take are going to actually deliver. And then sharing it, as Councillor Coulthard said, communication with the people that are making this waste or consuming the waste, because they're not making it, are they? They're just consuming it, and they haven't really got a choice necessarily. How can we deal with that? So that was.
Just in response to the issues you've raised, obviously the critical thing around side waste is actually why is it being generated in the first place, and what proportion of that could actually be recycled. Because when we see side waste, we know that there is a large proportion that if residents were to separate that and recycle it, then we could collect it as part of the dry mix recycling and then process it that way, which would actually reduce the amount of side waste that's being put out in the first place. Then in terms of the statistics, obviously for tonight's purposes, we've just sort of shown the high-level summary, but sitting beneath all of that is a complete breakdown of the type of the actual tonnage of waste that we collect. So it's split between green waste, food waste, the dry mix recycling, the residual waste, which we obviously look at as offers in terms of the detail. And again, we use that to actually then inform our comms and marketing the campaigns in terms of where we need to be targeting, whether we need to see an increase or decrease.
Thank you, Paul. Jess, you want to say something?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just very quickly, members, I just thought it'd be useful just to remind you, obviously, that you're here, obviously, looking at the draft policy this evening. So any suggestions or recommendations as such that you may need to be sort of in relevance to that. So, you know, it's just looking at it and, you know, kind of thinking about whether it's is it a readable document, things like that. You know, how did it come to be? Certainly, you can ask questions for clarification, but just to remember that any kind of suggestions you come up with tonight just need to be in line with what's in the policy. You can't change what's in there, but you can obviously give your feedback as to what you think. So I just thought it might be useful just to remind members of that at this stage. But thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Jess. Councillor Edwards.
Yes, thank you very much for that. Actually, one thing, congratulations really, the food waste bin. I know you copped a bit of flack for the latest publicity push for getting food waste bins, the food waste bin advertisement, but it's been an absolute revelation in our house. And although I do sometimes forget to put the tea bag in the proper bin, you know, and it's fantastic that it's saving the council money as well when we do it. So I appreciated that publicity push. Secondly, St Peter's Church have been in touch with me regarding what the procedure is for them to get a green waste bin. Is it different for businesses versus for individuals? Particularly, I mean, I suppose it's a church, not necessarily a business, but for organisations, say.
Essentially, churches, the waste generation church classified as household waste, so a church can subscribe to the actual garden waste service in the normal way that any other resident can.
Brilliant. Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. And just on missed collections, that 12 p.m. next day cut-off, is that a hard and fast thing? If you don't report it by 12 p.m. the next day, if your collection is missed, that you simply won't get a collection at all?
I think it depends upon what resource we have available. The reason we've done that is because the way in which we collect our from properties is on an area basis. So from Monday and Tuesday we're in the north of the district, and then we work our way through to being in Braintree, being the closest point to the centre of the district on a Friday. So if there are any problems, you know, we can address those before the weekend. The difficulty we have is once we move out of an area, then obviously we have to send back a vehicle that increases our non-productive travelling time and our staff time as well. So our preference is to try and ask residents, you know, if we have missed a collection, generally missed a collection, to contact us by that time so that we're still in the area and then we can return and actually collect the bin.
Okay, fantastic. And just one final question. Do you have an update on the numbers of people that have currently subscribed to the service? Particularly versus your projection for how many people you need to subscribe?
Yes, I do. In terms of the, as of Monday, it was 26,000 plus properties that had subscribed against what was originally 10% take up, which I think was 6,000 odd properties.
Nearly 40%.
So effectively, we're nearly 40% of properties have now subscribed.
Fantastic. And I know that you had then... Sorry, I know I said that was my final question, but this is actually my final question. You had forecast successive years that you wanted to increase it every year. Have you now smashed all those targets as well, or are you, you know, is there still somewhere higher to go, do you think?
We're actually remodelling. That we've agreed as part of the overall project that we'll remodel the number of properties and the projections on a 3-monthly basis, and that's something that we will look at, because obviously the more people that sign up to the service, the more it's going to cost to actually deliver the service, because you need more vehicles and more resources. So it's something that we are looking at in conjunction with colleagues in finance.
Thank you so much.
Councillor Jeffers.
Sorry, Jessica, it's not in the policy. I was just going to say, and this isn't my question, but I was going to say that it must be an incredibly difficult job sorting out the teams when you've got new properties coming on and the teams are having to take on extra work. And at some point, I suppose, you do have to eventually put on another team. But obviously that's going to be quite a big gap, and so those teams are taking on more work each time. And we know they do an incredible job. My actual question is about 3.6 and the difference between Braintree and Colchester. Is it just the sideways, or is it like for like? Do they collect the same as we do, or do they do any of these extra streams?
In effect, Colchester have a sort of hybrid system because they have actually both sacks and bins, which is within their sort of various wards. It's actually quite a difficult service, I think, to actually deliver on the ground. At least with Braintree, we've got some consistency, but there's no doubt that we are generating, our residents generate more residual waste per household than what Colchester does, taking into account the fact they've got more properties than what we have, but they don't collect side waste, which is something obviously that we do, so it's something that we really need to target and drive down. And as Samir has said, unless we reduce the amount of residual waste that we're going to collect, then it's going to continue to impact on our performance in terms of recycling.
Councillor Thorogood.
I've got a question related to 3.6 as well. Colchester is obviously more of an urban council than Braintree, I think, because it's a city and obviously it does have some rural areas, but Braintree, I think, is about half and half urban and half rural. Now, could that be the reason why we have more waste than them? And if that is the case, could a lot of that be garden waste already going in the black bins? And I've heard anecdotally that people saying that they're prepared to pay the $27.50 this year, but when it doubles next year, they're not going to. But they might change their mind or whatever. But are you anticipating more garden waste to go in the black bins? Because it's very heavy, obviously. If you've got grass cuttings or damp, wet leaves, or it weighs a lot, and that which has an effect on the lorries because they can only carry X amount of tonnage at one time. And my last question is it actually against the law to put garden waste in the black bin? Because if it is, we need to make that known. Thank you.
I mean, we accept that there will be an element of garden waste that goes in the residual bin, although we'd like to think that our residents will be responsible and not do that and effectively sign up for a green bin in order that we can provide them with the service. Garden waste is classified as household waste. However, we could actually stipulate the receptacle the waste needs to go in. So effectively, we have provided a green bin collection service, and that's where our residents should be putting their green waste in, not in the residual waste bin. And it's something that technically we could enforce against. Clearly, we want to work with residents in terms of education, intervention, and rather than enforcement, first and foremost. But we would be expecting residents to subscribe to the new service and make sure they do put their green waste in the green bin rather than in the residual bin or the black bin.
Thank you. The challenges posed by the subscription green bin collection to the Essex County Council recycling targets and the financial implications not shared in the Essex County Council waste plan, because obviously they didn't tell us how much per tonne it was to incinerate something or what the latest was to bury it. But the subscription bin collection, if it is smashed, as Councillor Edwards suggests, and there's loads of money sloshing around, which is potentially good, is there a way in which, rather like the amenity service, which is already pulled out in your report, dust carts used to go to more rural villages on appointment or through coordination with the parish councils, and you'll be able to collect those bits of, or chunks of, or masses of green waste very efficiently, preventing any less contamination of the black bin, less fly tipping, fewer bonfires, less risk of uncontrolled fires at harvest time, etc. Again, I'm conscious of Jess's point about what we can and can't do, but I'd very much like it if this committee could suggest actually there's a point at which we're in Clover, and we could potentially send out those waste trucks to those potentially rural communities with older residents. The scouts could, like they used to do, get the wheelbarrow from your garden, take it to the waste place. It could be a really nice community event, and be very much more cost effective than seeing it end up at the incinerator, because it doesn't. The calorific value of burning damp leaves is very poor, and it makes a lot of smoke and nasty stuff. So that was the point really, about making that more convenient and available to folks really, so they can properly recycle.
So just in response to that, I mean, what I would say is obviously that, as I said earlier, obviously the more people subscribe to the service, the higher the cost is of actually delivering it. So I think we just sort of need to make the point that it's not effectively lots of profit here in terms of the actual going into the council sky. It actually means that we'll need more vehicles and more resource, more labour to provide the service. If we'd have actually run with the initial 10% model, then we were probably looking at a vehicle plus 3 people. But given the fact that we're now sort of nearly 40%, we're probably up to 3 vehicles plus. And at least we're 6 vehicles at the moment. But we're looking at least 3.5 vehicles, which obviously is going to increase the cost of providing that service. So I think it's important to say that there's not a huge amount of money that's actually available to actually reallocate to another service. As for example, in amenity service, when we speak, we do provide an amenity service, but not specifically for green waste. But parishes can request the amenity service and pay for that, and it has been used by some parishes in the past.
Thank you, Paul. I think Dan has a point.
Thanks, Chairman. Well, just a reminder to members who will have seen at the Cabinet meeting on Monday that the Council's medium-term financial forecast shows still a gap of 2.3 million after 4 years, and that allows for the latest assumptions based on the sign-up that we've had so far to date. So I think there's still a financial challenge, is the reality.
Thank you, Dan. Councillor Bond.
Thank you. The cessation of collection of side waste, because I do believe that when it is collected, it's a disincentive to those who work their socks off to understand what can and can't be recycled and toddle to the bin banks and those sorts of things. So I think as part of that policy, I welcome that. What I'm interested in, forgive the phrase, a deep dive into the residual waste to see actually what's going in there. Because one of the things I do know about Colchester is they collect their glass. And I'm wondering, and that's quite heavy, so I'm wondering if that perhaps skews our waste figures. I may be wrong, and of course it's all anecdote, but I think that is possibly having some impact, and that's in a comment rather than anything to do with policy. But it'd be very interesting if we have people who are brave enough to do the deep dive that I described. Thank you.
Oh, Councillor Jeffries.
Perhaps Councillor Bond wants to deep dive. I was just thinking in terms of the policy, which is what we're supposed to be looking at, of course. And so you've made one suggestion, and I just think that perhaps what we've been talking about really is about communication, and there might be something that I've missed in there, that we do some communication. I think as well, you're right about the children. It's interesting to get them on board about what can be recycled and how important that is for the wider community, that we don't put stuff in landfill, and get maybe some projects going with the schools. I don't know that we can put that in the policy as such, but I think communication is really important.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffries. Councillor Staines.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up on Councillor Jeffrey's point, it'll be part of the communication is potentially back to the residents and all the schools and everything else like that. But I think another big part that could potentially be included in this policy is the information back to government. So we've got all this stuff that we can't recycle. It looks like this, and this. This is the tonnage that it was. We're going to work as the Essex Waste Partnership plus Kent plus Suffolk plus whatever it is, and send it all back and say the stuff that's being produced cannot be recycled, it's being incinerated, and that's not right. Please do something about it, because if we're not holding them to account and asking them to legislate against it, because they can legislate for a toothbrush, they can legislate for a stirrer in a cup, they can legislate for a single-use plastic bag. So the more information that we're able to give them as a responsible and forward-looking waste authority, let's give it to them, both barrels.
Thank you, Councillor Staines. Any other members have any questions? Well, thank you. If there are no further questions, we've been asked to consider the draft policy and make any recommendations as part of the finalisation of the draft policy in anticipation of its approval by Cabinet. So we are recommending, these are recommendations about the readability, coherence, and perhaps layout of the policy rather than the actual content. Are there any recommendations members wish to make? Thank you, members. Can I take it that the report has been considered and noted? Show of hands? Perfect. Thank you, members. The report has been noted. Thank you, Paul and Samir, for your attendance this evening and for the responses to our questions. Sorry, there were quite so many. You may leave the meeting if you wish, but you're welcome to remain. Members, we will now proceed to agenda item 6, draft empty homes policy. Members, the report for this item is set out on pages 28 to 48 of the agenda. I would like to welcome Carly Jones, Strategy Business Support Manager, and Caroline Elias Stevenson, Head of Housing and Communities, who will be our lead officers for the item this evening, and will be providing members with an overview of the draft empty homes policy. In support of officers, we also have Councillor Lynette Bowers-Flint, Cabinet Member for Housing, Health and Wellbeing in attendance. Welcome to you all. Carly, Caroline, I can't remember which one of you is starting. I'd like to invite you to introduce yourselves to the committee and provide an overview of your report. Members, we will take questions at the end. Thank you.
So I'm Caroline Elias Stevenson, Head of Housing and Communities, and I have to say that Carly has done all the work, so she's going to lead on this piece. I'm here to support, so over to you, Carly.
Okay, my name's Carly Jones. I'm the Strategic and Business Support Manager, so I lead the research and development team in Housing and Communities. And we have an empty homes officer and private rented sector officer as well now in the team. So this is something that we produced in June. I'm going to give you some more updated statistics, so bear with me. We produce this every 6 months, so the next one will be produced in January. So as you're looking at it, if the numbers don't quite match, it's just because I'm giving you something more updated from September. So as it stands at the moment, there is no statutory requirement to have an empty homes policy, but it is recommended that the council has one in place in order to reduce the number of empty homes we have in the district. So I'm going to start with kind of a little bit of a background. So in March 2023, the council adopted the Healthy Housing Strategy 2023 to 2028. And as part of the public consultation that we undertook, where we asked about all the priorities, 80% of respondents, which is extremely high, rated reducing the number of empty properties in the district by exploring options to bring them back into use as highest importance. So that goes to show the importance of kind of empty homes in our district is a real issue, and it's a real concern for members of the public. So on to the infographic we have on the screen. As you can see in the middle, it says we have 69,000 properties. We're now at 69,484 properties in the district, and that was at the end of September. And 2,647 of those properties currently stand empty. So what we do is we get the total number of empty properties, and we remove all of those that we class as exempt, and then that's our number that we focus on. So as it stands at the moment, we have 1,000 and 39 properties. So 1.5% of empty properties are long-term empty and unoccupied and unfurnished. So what that means is we take out all of those that are empty under 6 months. And the reason we do that is because they could be ones that are void through housing associations or new builds. So there's no point us kind of targeting those ones because we expect them to have a fairly quick turnaround. So we focus on those that are over 6 months. But what we're focusing on, probably more in this strategy, is 2 years plus. 2 years to 5 years is recommended from our research with our partners in our neighbouring districts as properties to approach. So there's a high demand for housing within a housing district, as we know. In July 2023, there were 2,235 active applications on the housing register. So bringing empty properties back into use will increase the supply of properties we have and hopefully kind of start to kind of meet our demand. So what we have done is in May 2023, we employed an empty homes and a private rented sector officer full-time. And in November, just 2 weeks ago, we employed a private rented sector sustainability officer, sustainment officer. And then on the 13th of November, we launched our landlord incentive scheme, which we're really excited about. So this is a pilot scheme that we are running for 18 months, and it provides a financial incentive to landlords to provide tenancies to homeless households in the district. So we would like to use this scheme also with our empty homes and our property owners of empty homes. So since it started, it was only a couple of weeks ago, we've already got one household into the private rented sector and we've got another viewing tomorrow. So the scheme is working already in the short space of time that it's been in place, which is really good. So ultimately, the aim of this policy is to reduce the number of empty homes by offering advice and assistance to homeowners. The extensive research that's been undertaken by our empty homes and private rented sector officer shows that the best course of action is to identify the properties through 2 routes: complaints from the public, which we have a mailbox where complaints come through to, and council tax data. So all the information that you see on the screen there is from apart from the ones on the right, is from our council tax data. And then to offer support through our 3-stage engagement letter. So what we have is we have an internal working group where we discuss properties in details, and then we have a target. We have target homes that we would like to kind of prioritise to take action against if needed. The last option will always be to take appropriate and proportionate enforcement action. But like I said, the research that we've taken with our neighbouring districts have said that doesn't really need to happen because the 3-stage enforcement letter and where we contact and offer support to start with, and then kind of it basically gets more support, and if the property is causing considerable concerns to residents, there are kind of some enforcement actions that we can take, but we don't want it to ever get that far. And as I said, kind of neighbours such as Uttlesford are saying that we shouldn't have to take much action, hopefully. So that's kind of where we're at.
Thank you. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you ever so much, Carly. That was very interesting, and the report itself very interesting. Just a couple of clarifying questions. I know in the report that you say the council doesn't use compulsory purchasing or hasn't seen the need to, but you do mention enforced sales, and I wonder if the council uses enforced sales very often.
Sorry. Did you want to say that one? There you go.
So that's not something that necessarily that we do at this time. It's just an option that's available to us. So I think that the point for this from this policy is to be able to say that we can explore all options, and that being any kind of enforcement action be a final option that we would hope not to get to. But at this time, there isn't an approach or a policy towards any kind of enforcement action around empty homes.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. And just on the landlord incentive scheme, and I appreciate this is probably slightly mean, so I apologise, a slightly maybe pessimistic view. Could you view this as the council putting money into private landlords' pockets because of a kind of long-term problem of there not being enough social housing, generally not building enough homes, you could say nationwide, to cater for the demand that we're now seeing?
Yes. So the thing about the incentive scheme is other areas have the incentive scheme. So when we're trying to get a family on who's reliant on benefits or low incomes into the private rented sector, and all the barriers that they have to face in terms of going through an estate agent, having to do a credit check, having to provide a reference, and then being on reliant on benefits or low income, we have our neighbouring districts who can then offer rent up front and deposits and incentive schemes. A lot of those areas are using Braintree District to do that, so it means that those in our district and our residents don't stand a chance to get into the private rented sector. Also with local housing allowances, we know that's going to change, but it's so low and there's such a difference at the moment between local housing allowance and what private rented sector landlords are asking for. This is in place to be able to give everyone like an equal footing to enter the private rented sector. So as I said, it started and it's already, we've got landlords starting to approach us. So it's something we've had to take into consideration what we offer, because are we creating a situation where this is going to be expected going forward? But this is kind of what's, the option that's available to us at the moment.
Can I just add as well to that? I think, so we had our first private rented sector landlords forum recently, which was really useful. And I think the feedback from landlords are that they are struggling as well. And we do have a lot of really good landlords in our district who are wanting to do more, but the increasing cost of living is really impacting them as well. So to incentivise, to be able to support and guarantee that they can get some of their money in, means that it's opening avenues for us. And one of the things that we need to do, as Carly has said, she's talked about the numbers on our waiting list, and that's just for social housing, but we've also got numbers coming through the doors, seeing our housing options team who are threatened with homelessness. We need to open up the access to other avenues for housing, and this is a route to do it.
Thank you very much, and sorry for the slightly pessimistic tone of that previous question. Just my final question would be, so this obviously hasn't been going for that long, the landlord incentive scheme. Is there kind of a date where you go, right, we're going to take a look at this, see it's working, see its efficacy, is this providing value for money, and how will that be reported out? Will that be to full council, would it be to Cabinet, would it perhaps be to the Governance and Audit Committee? Do you know yet how you're going to report whether or not this scheme has been a success?
So it's an 18-month scheme, and it's funded through a top-up that we have for the homeless prevention grant. So we have some criteria that we have to meet through that homeless prevention grant anyway. So it will be reported back through that process. We are doing some real robust monitoring around this, so we will make sure that we are coming back to all of the relevant committees. But I think to establish a long-term scheme, it's more than likely it will come back to Cabinet at the point that we know if it's been successful or not.
Could I ask a question? Which is really for clarification. Everybody, I think, is on the side of the homeless. I do feel the landlords get sort of bashed a bit. How does the sort of Airbnb holiday homes type rental affect the empty homes situation? Because I had a neighbour who, funnily enough, people started complaining about. I don't know why. He was doing up a house to be an Airbnb house, I think, for about 11 months, and everyone. I think the builder, maybe it was him who was annoying people, but people were complaining. This house is no longer available for real residents, whatever that meant. And he was doing it up to rent it out by the week or the weekend or whatever on a holiday basis. And I think in the end sold it, in fact, and didn't do that. But how does the Airbnb and that sort of second home thing affect are we encouraged, are Airbnb and holiday homes and second homes discouraged, or do we just, how do they fit into the figures? If that is the nonsense question.
Yeah, I think where we stand at the moment is we're not seeing a huge issue. I mean, in the last statistics I've got in terms of second homes are they up there? No, they're on here. It's just over 205 second homes which are unoccupied but furnished
Right.
in our figures of around 2,000. So it's not huge compared to some of our other areas.
No.
There's something on, it shows you kind of, I think Cornwall's like 1 in 14 or something
Yes.
like this. So actually kind of where we sit, it's not huge. This is something we're exploring more with Airbnbs, and especially annexes as well. But we're in the early stages of looking.
So we're neither
that.
encouraging it nor discouraging it. Fantastic. But I thought this was very well written and made perfect sense. But does anyone else have any questions? Councillor Jeffries.
I just wanted to ask about who owns the empty homes? Are they owned by landlords, and so the actual owners are not like all individuals? They're like collections of houses.
We're still in the early stages of really understanding our empty homes and understanding why they're empty and why they're going up so considerably as well. What we do know is it tends to be not a few landlords with a lot of properties, it's a lot of landlords with a few properties. So whether we've had people that have inherited properties and just don't know what to do with them, maybe family homes where parents passed away and they don't want to get rid of it, but they don't know what to do. So we've got a real mix, but one kind of part of our agenda is to really understand and really reach out to landlords. Because we haven't had the policy in place, we've kind of been limited on what we want to do. And like I say, we don't have to have a policy in place, but we think it's good practice if we're going to kind of contact landlords en masse to have this, so we can provide a policy if anybody requires it.
Councillor Staines.
Thank you, Chair. I thought this was excellent, really, really good, really well considered. I love the examples, but one of them, I can't remember which one it was in, which appendix it was in, talked about a conversion of a commercial property to 3 flats, I think it was. So my question was around, obviously there have been some changes to national policy, permitted development, shops to dwellings or other use types of dwellings. Are you looking at tracking empty commercial properties as well, with a view to potentially including some of these into a bigger housing stream?
So we are working with the environmental health team to track those properties. What I would say is this is a really early days and we'd quite like to get it right with the empty homes first of all. But we're starting to track and see what's happening and kind of get the data around commercial properties in the background. But the focus for this policy at this point, which can evolve to encompass perhaps commercial properties, but is around empty homes just at this stage.
Just because there's just an example in my ward at the moment. There's a previous place of worship, very small, rural, empty for over a year. So she bought it, has done it up to live in it, and now she's in the planning process. And what they're asking for is for that to be marketed for a further year as a place of worship before it can be converted to a dwelling change of use. And obviously, that's not necessarily in step with the great stuff that you're doing. So it's just, I guess, as it emerges and you get more critical mass, you'll be able to influence some of those discussions as well. Because that particular example, it sits between 2 other residences. It has been unoccupied for a long period of time. It was not necessarily commercial, but it was a place of worship, and it'll make a great little house. So, thanks.
Councillor Bond.
Sorry, just a clarification and understanding. What is an exempt home, please?
So this could be where somebody has gone into a care home. We've got some owned by charities. We've got a couple of people in prison. It could be a whole host of reasons why people aren't in the property. We have a whole exempt list on council tax.
Councillor Thorogood.
Yeah, just a quick question on council tax regarding empty homes. I think Baber, if the council's been empty for 2 years, they charge double the council tax on that property. is that the same for Braintree? And can you just explain how it works and how you go about collecting income from empty private houses, not the housing association, but private empty houses, if you can?
Yeah, well, this is done through council tax. So I don't know kind of the full process, but I believe in some stats I've got here, sorry, I'm full of stats in my team, but I think we have something like 74 who are paying, I think it's 74 now, when this was when it was 62, paying the maximum council tax, which actually goes up to 4 times the amount, and they're paying it in full. So for those, an incentive to bring it back in is not going to be financial. So that's why I think some of those, which are, my understanding from council tax, is quite an emotional kind of with their property. But they do, after a certain amount of years, they take all the powers they can in terms to increase the council tax, to encourage people to either sell them, or it's not always about bringing them back into use, it's about selling them, or at least keeping them up to, not making sure that they're not overgrown and there's not rodents, because then it goes over to environmental health. So we do have a working group with our empty homes officer, council tax and environmental health, where we're starting to profile. We've got a matrix where we go out and we look at a property and we profile it and we give it a scoring. And once this goes through, we will target those potentially with the highest scoring as well. That's the way we'll be looking at kind of targeting properties.
Just to add to that as well, I think what Carly said about the emotional attachment to some properties is why we've recruited a specific officer to be a face to this, so that we can actually start building those relationships and connections.
And also, if it is any use, we in 2019 we published the policy for second homes and long-term empty properties and determining discounts for certain dwellings. A very long title, but that's a title which kind of breaks down action that can be taken against from council tax perspective.
Any further questions? Sorry, microphone. Emergency. Thank you, members. If there are no further questions, we've been asked to consider the draft policy and the future management of empty homes within the district. Are there any comments members wish to make? Thank you, members. Can I take it that the report has been considered and noted? Could I have a show of hands? Perfect. Thank you, members. The report has been noted. Thank you, Carly. Thank you, Caroline. And Councillor Bowers-Flint for your presentation and for the responses provided. Members, we will now proceed to agenda item 7, draft homelessness and rough sleeping strategy. Members, the report for this item is set out on pages 49 to 63 of the agenda. Once again, I would like to welcome Carly Jones, Strategy Business Support Manager, and Caroline Elias-Stevenson, Head of Housing and Communities, who will be providing members with an overview of the draft strategy. Again, we also have Councillor Lynette Bowers-Flint, Cabinet Member for Housing, Health and Wellbeing, in attendance. Welcome again to you all. Officers, unless you have any questions first, I'd like to invite you to introduce your report. Members, we will take questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Apparently I volunteered to come in front of your committee this evening, so please be gentle. I've had a hard week. Good evening, members, by the way, sorry. The purpose of bringing this report to you this evening is to provide the committee with an opportunity to consider the priorities contained within the draft homelessness and rough sleeping strategy 2024 to 2028 prior to the draft strategy being taken to public consultation. Nationally, 1 in 208 households are homeless. Throughout September 2023, the council accommodated or already had living in temporary accommodation 65 households, which included 75 adults and 97 children. Evidence collected so far has shown that households presenting as homeless have more complex needs than previous years. We know that we have many households in the district who are at risk of homelessness, and the aim of this strategy is to provide advice and support both directly and through the community, so help is available when first needed, therefore leading to less households being homeless and reducing the cost of homelessness to the district. Under the Homelessness Act 2002, all housing authorities must have in place a homeless strategy, and the strategy must be renewed at least every 5 years. The current homelessness strategy covers the period 2018 to 2023. With more pressure on local housing, the draft strategy is designed to support households facing homelessness at an earlier stage to help reduce homelessness and rough sleeping in the district with the following 4 priorities. Prevent homelessness wherever possible, facilitate the delivery of suitable temporary accommodation, increase access to suitable accommodation, prevent and break the cycle of rough sleeping. I'm asking the committee to consider the draft strategy, provide initial feedback to lead officers as part of the consultation process being undertaken. And what I just draw your attention, members, in the report is under 3.1 where it says Ranger District Council is required under the Homeless Act to publish a homeless strategy, which I've just said. The current homelessness strategy covers the period 2018-23, but it retains a clear focus upon intervention to prevent homelessness, or if prevention is not possible, to end homelessness at the earliest opportunity. And that is the key issue here, is intervention and prevention, because we feel that intervening and trying to prevent is much more helpful to those people and families than waiting till they turn up on our doorstep with no roof over their heads. We've already undertaken some work for this strategy, and we've held a stakeholder event on the 9th of November to gather feedback on the strategy, and this was attended by 35 partners, and the feedback from this event included there needs to be strong emphasis in the prevention of homelessness at the early opportunity. I attended that and it was well received by the stakeholders who did attend. So I'll stop there, Chairman, and hand over to members if there's any questions. Thank you.
Councillor Edwards.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bowers-Flynn. And I mean, just firstly, congratulations. The council, I think, has a very strong record on homelessness. You know, homelessness is a societal ill, and it's horrendous that anyone should ever become homeless. But it's encouraging to know that the council does have such a strong action plan. A couple of questions, if I may. Do we have anyone sleeping rough in the district? I know you said that you're aware that you have 65 homeless households. I assume those have been brought in and being offered accommodation, but are there any people who are literally without a home?
So we have to do an annual rough sleepers count, and over the last few years the average has been 5 rough sleepers that have been counted. This year it was 4. Currently we are under severe weather emergency protocols, SWEP, which means that anybody that is in need of accommodation, because we don't always have that duty to accommodate every single person, but anybody that is in need of accommodation with the weather the way it is, we will accommodate them. And I think the numbers yesterday were around 2. So, but as an annual figure, we do have between 4 and 6 rough sleepers. I don't know if you're going to cover some of that in the presentation, but is it worth?
I've got a few slides which might just give you a little bit kind of context. If that'd be useful. Yeah.
Should we go for the slides? Yes.
Yeah, let's. Sorry. Yeah.
No, that's fine. Okay. Oh, this is on. Yes.
Do you need the clicker?
Do I need the clicker? Yes. Thank you.
Click
on. Can you click it? Okay. Here we go. Okay. I appreciate there's a lot of words on here, but I think to start with the homelessness and rough sleeping strategy is just to clarify the kind of definition we've got on homelessness. So the Housing Act defines a person as homeless if they have no accommodation available to occupy, are at risk of violence or domestic abuse, have accommodation but it's not reasonable for them to continue to occupy it, have accommodation but can't secure entry to it, have no legal right to occupy their accommodation, live in a mobile home or houseboat and have no place to put it or live in it. We also have households who are threatened with homeless. So threatened with homeless, also at risk of homelessness. So they may be threatened with eviction or living in insecure tenancies. They may worry that their tenancy is coming to an end. They may be living in poor housing conditions. And this could be maybe in the private rented sector without a legal tenancy agreement. Or just that they need to leave their accommodation for a whole range of reasons. But legally, you are threatened with homelessness if it's likely that you'll become homeless within 56 days, and if you've been served a valid Section 21 notice. We've also got hidden homeless. So these are people who are not currently rough sleeping, but they don't have a long-term settled place to stay. So this could be staying with friends. It's also known as kind of sofa surfing, but you are of no fixed abode. And then we have rough sleeping, which is the most visible form of homelessness. So those are people who are sleeping or about to bed down. So in terms of the street count we just did, this is the definition that you'd have to use to say that somebody is rough sleeping. So about to bed down, that means they're sitting or standing next to their bed, or they are actually bedded down, and they are in the streets, in tents, doorways, parks, bus shelters, or encampments. So that's the definition that we use for homelessness in this strategy. Now, in the stakeholders event, I asked everyone to shout out how many people were homeless in the Braintree district, which I'm not going to ask now, but also because we have kind of gone through some of the numbers. And as Councillor Bowers-Flint explained, there were 65 households homeless were living in our temporary accommodation, so that's quite different. They are 65 households that we have placed in temporary accommodation. So that's 75 adults and 97 children. The street count then confirmed that we have 4 confirmed rough sleepers. Obviously, we're a very large rural district. There are, people sleeping all over in tents and in town centres. But we've also got those who are threatened with homeless and hidden homeless, and those who class as in a relief period where the local authority don't have a duty to accommodate. We also have homeless households placed in the district by other areas, and you're meant to provide a notice if you do, but that doesn't always happen. So if you add all those up together, it goes to show that homelessness is really underreported, and we can say who's in our temporary accommodation, but we can't say how many people are homeless in the district at any one time. There's a lot going on in this slide, but this was developed by the research and development team, and what it does is it provides national influences and milestones. So if you take a look, I don't know if there's a lot of red light on there, but if you take a look at the blue line that goes across is number of households in temporary accommodation, and the green line underneath it is number of households assisted into the private rented sector. So as you can see, in 2018, 2019, numbers were kind of fairly steady. They were going slightly up and down each month, but generally our numbers were fairly steady. Then you have lockdown, and then we had everyone in. So everybody that was rough sleeping got placed into accommodation. And then you can look at the other lockdowns, and you can see the cost of living. You can then see the pink line with inflation rates going up to where we are now. So we have more people in temporary accommodation inside the district and outside the district than ever. And also our numbers in the private rented sector are still kind of consistent to where they were 5 years ago. Hence why we've come up with the incentive scheme to try and kind of increase the numbers. So yeah, this kind of gives a snapshot of national influences, but also what's happening locally in the district at this moment. Does this skip? Okay. Just to give you kind of some main headlines of reasons for loss of settled home in Braintree district. So last year, 34% of households presenting as homeless were previously residing in the private rented sector. And 52% of those households were asked to leave because their landlord wanted to relet or sell their property. So that's 1 in 3 households who present as homeless are coming from the private rented sector in Braintree district. So the private rented sector, the tenure makes up about 15% of our housing stock. Nationally, the private rented sector is about 19%, so we're ever so slightly kind of below the rest of England. The Renters Reform Bill is meant to be a substantial reform to provide a fairer private rented sector, and this has taken into consideration kind of no-fault evictions and banning Section 21 no-fault evictions, but this has been postponed. In the last 5 years, the life of this previous for strategy. There was a total of 256 domestic abuse-related reasons for loss of settled homes. So Braintree District have recruited a specialist domestic abuse officer whose role is to coordinate advice and specialist advice to staff and households who have experienced domestic abuse. And we also have the Domestic Violence Sanctuary Scheme. So the Sanctuary Scheme is where you are referred into and safety measures are put on your property to try and keep you safe in the property for you and your family. We received 23 in 21-22 and we received 12 last year. And last year, family or friends, so the reason for being homeless was because a family or friend were no longer willing to accommodate you, was resulted for 100 households becoming homeless. But over a 5-year period, that accounted for 443 family members and 80 friends saying they could no longer accommodate people living with them full time. I could go on. I mean, I have 50 pages of a evidence document, which I've managed to get into 5 or 6 slides. But ultimately, what that's led to is... oh, yeah, sorry, I've just skipped it on here. Yeah, which ultimately has led on to our 4 recommended priorities, which we've explained. But the first one will be around prevention, so working with partners to prevent homelessness, intervening at the earliest opportunity. The second one is looking at our temporary accommodation to facilitate the delivery of suitable temporary accommodation for households whom we have a duty to offer accommodation. The third one is around move-on support, so where we get people into accommodation, how do we support them moving on from that accommodation into private rented sector, social housing, house multiple occupants, whatever it is to move on from supported housing and into independent living, and rough sleeping. So continue to work with our partners to prevent and break the cycle of rough sleeping in the district. And that is it for now.
Thank you, Collie. Councillor Bond.
Chairman, just before you open it to the floor, I have to say to you that I'm extremely proud as Cabinet Member with the responsibility for housing of this Council's stats on homelessness and rough sleeping. And it's only through the dedication of good officers that we have that figure like it is. But bear in mind that rough sleepers are not particularly easy people to deal with. They can have so many complex needs that they are sometimes unable to go into accommodation because the accommodation basically won't accommodate them because of their complexities. And I always used to, when I was responsible for housing many, many years ago, I used to pride myself then in the amount of families that were homeless that we did not accommodate in hotels. I cannot sit here and say that now because we are so short of properties that there are times when we do have to put homeless family in hotels. That does not sit easy with me whatsoever, because if you've just lost the roof over your head and you're homeless, the worst thing that you can do really is be put in a hotel, because it's not a good place to be. However, when you've got no choice, we do have to do it, but it is always at a last resort. But I just wanted to get that over to members to get them to, because obviously, because there's not so much involvement as the way the council is now, that we have an excellent record and we wish to continue that excellent record, but it is only down to the dedication of the staff and what they have to deal with now, because we're not necessarily getting more and more housing or homelessness people, but the ones that we are getting have got much more complex needs and requirements, and that takes a lot of staff time. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bond.
Thank you, Chairman. In direct response to Councillor Bowles-Flint's question, I would say that the document is really clear. What I would like to see, though, is more understanding or clarity around young people leaving care and what that means in terms of the support they need to secure and maintain a suitable accommodation. And I'd like to, and I also want to go back to the point about 97 children in September. When we're talking about prevention and intervention, actually those are the young people who potentially could be in the same face in future as adults. So what I, excuse me, what I would really value in this document is more about children and young people and how they will be supported. I appreciate this is a housing thing and it's led around adults and providing them, but how the agencies work together. I'd like to go back to those children and young people leaving care. I've had quite a career in this area, and one of the things I've noticed is the issues around youngsters who, for example, are placed in the Braintree district, whose home base is not. So they may have come from Basildon and spent the past 6 to 10 years living in Braintree, which then becomes effectively their resource of family, friends and so on, but because of legislation aren't automatically considered to be due housing within this district, and therefore how they can be supported through that difficulty, because it becomes these youngsters are leaving a very secure system and are then thrown out to move back to wherever they came from with no support, and then we are then unintentionally repeating the cycle. That's quite a lot to put into your document, which is succinct, but I think it's about what goes behind it, and that would be very valuable in some way or other within the document. Thank you.
First of all, Chairman, I will talk about care leavers and accommodation, because that actually falls within the County Council, and I happen to be Deputy Cabinet Member for Children's Services, which the care leavers come under our remit. And both the Cabinet Member and myself are really drilling down for the next 12 months on accommodation for care leavers, in so much as that we are going to meet with all of the districts on an individual basis on how the districts can help us going forward with those care leavers. Because what a massive step to come out of care and put in accommodation, not always that they can afford and get enough money with benefits and everything like that on. And we're also looking at how we get them into the employment and working with bigger companies to see if they can get employment, including Essex County Council itself, I must add. So that part of it, Councillor Bond, is within the county's remit. But I get your concern about the amount of children that are homelessness. But Caroline can answer, I'm sure, what we do as a district on that part.
So, just to add to this strategy, just to give a bit of context, there will be an action plan, a delivery plan that sits behind the strategy, which will be more detailed, and we also have an evidence base, which Carly took all her stats from, which is 50 pages long, which we haven't brought today. Your comment about a particular cohort is something that we're really conscious we haven't kind of drilled down on any particular cohorts, because we've tried to encompass the fact that we don't want anybody to be in this situation. And so that number one priority, which for me encompasses everything that we should be doing around prevention, is at all levels, is at a system level where we work with integrated care and we work with the county council, and whether that be around young people or vulnerable people. And then it's also at a stage where we're working with partners such as our Citizens Advice or our food banks to get intelligence, to understand who we're seeing. And then it's also the individual people that come in to see us. And so what we want to do is make sure that we aren't focusing on any one particular cohort. We are encompassing everybody from an early intervention stage. If we have a family that comes in and there are children within that family, they are automatically categorised as being in priority need in terms of our duty to offer accommodation. We do have to then look at other criteria as well to see if we have a long-term duty. But we would prioritise those households with children to be able to look at alternative accommodation options, whether it be social housing or whether it be into the private rented sector. They would be our priorities, because they would be a priority under the legislation as well. But as I say, we want to make sure that prevention bit encompasses all cohorts.
In the evidence document, as I've got it open on my screen here, we do highlight kind of care leavers and the impact of homelessness on children. So we have figures of how many care leavers have approached the council over a 5-year period, and this is something that we're targeting as well.
Councillor Edwards.
Hi, thank you. And I seem to have jumped the gun slightly, but I very much appreciate the presentation. Just a couple more questions. What is the process for declaring yourself homeless? And if we as councillors have someone come to us who says, I am homeless, I need support, who do we contact in the council? Who do we report that to?
So our housing options team are the people that would deal with anybody that is homeless or threatened with homelessness. And we have an out of hours as well, so it's 24 hours in terms of being able to offer support around that. And obviously, if anybody is approached from a members of the councillor's point of view, then it would be to contact our housing options team or myself, and then we can refer that on.
And what we're trying to do as well is encourage when people come in, not when they're homeless, but if they're having problems with their landlords or they're having tenancy issues, that's the time we want to start supporting people earlier on, so they don't end up kind of, being evicted or having to go into temporary accommodation.
Yeah, the prevention bit that you highlighted as being so important. Absolutely. In terms of just to go back to those 97 children, apologies, I know that we have talked extensively about them. Do we know how much do we actually know about them? Do we know if they're in school? Do we know their kind of attendance at school? What's the framework for the wider kind of view of how these children are kind of progressing through life if they are homeless?
So when a household approaches us as homeless, we have to take all the information around that household. And when we're looking to place somebody in temporary accommodation, things like where they go to school have to be considered. That being said, we have to place somebody, if we have to place somebody and there is nowhere else to place them, we would place them further away from their school. We would always try not to do that wherever possible. So we know that information just from the Housing Options Officer taking the information. One of the things we do want to do is work closer with education services. We are employing a community support employment officer, so looking at transitioning and future-proofing as well. So we definitely want to be upstreaming that prevention bit with those new generations. So it's a piece of work that we are looking at for future, definitely.
And out of those 97 children, a majority of them are not in hotels. They do get prioritised to go into our housing, East Light Property housing stock, so they can be in there for a longer period, hopefully close to their school. But it does mean that they're not between temporary accommodation, nightly lets, moving around. They're in a stable temporary accommodation.
Fantastic, thank you. And in terms of, I'm just seeking some clarification on the time frame. So if someone declares themselves homeless, you say that you've got 65 households. I know that up there you said that sort of 100 households, I think, came to you last year. What's the average time frame that a household spends receiving homelessness support from the council? I assume there is a whole team. I assume you do that every day to try and get them out of that. But what's the kind of average time frame that someone can expect to receive support from the council?
How's that for it?
We just have a look, and we can answer that in terms of we will have that information available to us in terms of how long they're in temporary accommodation. But there are so many influencing factors, and you saw that wonderfully complicated graph up there, which really does capture the kind of influences around how many households we're seeing, but also how difficult it is to access alternative accommodation or any accommodation for a long-term kind of sustainability. And so therefore it can be a bit of a how long is a piece of string, but we can find a stat and provide that for you in terms of the average time in temporary accommodation.
Fantastic, thank you. And final question, it's not really a question actually. The forward, I think, is missing from this report. At least I can't see it. Yeah, it's just a nice picture of your face, which is lovely to see, but no, it's lovely to see, but it's just a page of your face on it. Oh, right, okay, that's on purpose. Great, okay, cool, thank you very much.
Can Dan make a comment?
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, just a bit of a reflection on the relate to my previous intervention on the budget, actually, because one of the things that we haven't talked about is the cost of providing temporary accommodation, which, I mean, and looking at the graph there with the numbers ticking up actually quite a lot, I would say, in the last few months alone. You know, that is a pattern that we see across the country, actually, but also certainly across Essex and with some of our neighbours, particularly Chelmsford and Colchester and Basildon. And it's worth just pointing out that in the autumn statement, whilst the Chancellor did announce an unfreezing of the LHA rate from 2020 up to current levels at the 30th percentile, that will benefit and hopefully prevent some households going into homelessness. But it doesn't help our costs for temporary accommodation. So the rate that we get as what they call a subsidy for anyone in temporary accommodation from the LHA is still set at 90% of the 2011 levels. So there's a big subsidy loss for anyone who's in temporary accommodation. Chelmsford are, for example, predicting a cost of about £3.5 million over 18 months just from temporary accommodation costs. Colchester have got some similar figures, and we don't, but we have, you'll see in the budget papers again, there's a provision of, I think, 150,000 for next financial year to cover off some of the additional costs for temporary accommodation. And it's worth just being aware of that, because I think it is something that we're conscious, if it were to start to affect us in anything like the way it's affecting some of our neighbours, that again will be another significant pressure on the council's budget position.
Thank you, Jan. Councillor Jeffrey, sorry, you've had your hand up for hours.
It's just on 3.6, you talk about having a consultation from the middle of December for 10 weeks. I just wondered what format the consultation was going to take place, because I'm thinking about if you come and ask us and we're all nicely housed and comfortable, I hope, we might be given a different sort of response to somebody who is perhaps on the verge of homelessness or actually in homeless accommodation. And I just wondered if there was some way of capturing their opinions as well as the general sort of public.
Yes, so the consultation's been moved ever so slightly to after Cabinet in January, so it'll be going around kind of end of January for 10 weeks now. We've, at the stakeholders event, we had so many people working with whether in supported accommodation or in temporary accommodation who are desperate to influence and be part of this homeless strategy, which we want. It's a partnership strategy. So we have groups arranged for us to go and talk to people. We really want to have more case studies in this. When we did the healthy housing strategy, it was very much went out to the public and we had a really good response, but this is a very different consultation. And one of our priorities is around lived experience. And we want to hear from people that have gone through what could we have done better, and also where could we have intervened earlier that would have made a difference to their journey. So yeah, this will be a very different consultation to the ones we've done before.
Can I ask a question? We talk about prevention, and obviously that's, or intervention, and obviously that would be fantastic, but depending on how many people who end up needing our help who come from our district, I mean, what is the proportion coming from outside? Because obviously we can't prevent or intervene there. And how do those homeless people who come from outside the district get here, and why are they here?
It depends where they become homeless, because if they become homeless elsewhere other than in Braintree district, they actually are not our responsibility. And so they have to declare themselves homeless where they've been made homeless, if you get what I mean. So, but one of our biggest problems, and it's been happening for years, but obviously worse now, is that other authorities house people within this district, and they are supposed to politely tell us that they're doing that, but unfortunately they don't. So we're not aware of just how many people we've got now housed from other districts in private rented accommodation. So they're taking the private rented accommodation that we could use for our homelessness, but it's already been taken.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Thorogood.
Yeah, I was going to ask a similar question actually. You did mention about households coming from outside the area, and I asked Councillor Bowes-Flint earlier in this term of the council about what percentage of households go from outside go to housing association. I think you said it's about 10% overall. So I was going to ask, is there you say that there are some authorities are putting homeless people in private accommodation, but is there a statutory requirement or some sort of agreement where you have to take homeless people from other authorities? Because anecdotally I hear people moaning, going, oh, these people from Hackney have just been given a flat, or they've been given a house, or someone from Tower Hamlets has been given a house, and they think, why aren't they looking after their own people? Why aren't we housing our own? So is that a statutory requirement? But also, does it go the other way? Because I understand someone contacted me and they were in a flat with 2 primary school age children, and they're looking to get a 3-bedroom house, and then one came up near them, and then they were told they were 75th in the waiting list for it, but they were offered a place in Lowestoft, but they work locally and their support structures here, so that wasn't obviously any good to them. So I just wondered if we do that, and if that's, do we have to take people from other authorities?
So when we're talking about homeless people, if we're looking at the criteria where we actually have a statutory duty, one of the criteria is a local connection. So that is something like somebody having lived in the area for 6 out of the last 12 months, 3 out of the last 5 years, or a close family relative. Obviously, that's overridden by people who are fleeing violence for some reason, whether it be domestic or not. So, first of all, we would only have people. We would only accept a statutory duty to put somebody who's got a local connection with us. In terms of accommodating people, so other authorities accommodating within the district, it may be because they don't have enough temporary accommodation, so then they're using accommodation in our district to discharge their duties, and that creates a challenge. But they do actually, under the legislation, have to notify us.
That's private.
It can be private, or it could be in a HMO, or it could be any kind. It's not through our housing register. Oh. We also have a local connection criteria within the housing register, so the Gateway to Home Choice. But obviously, people can apply cross-boundary, but they will have less of a priority because there is a local connection criteria within that as well, which is slightly different to the homelessness duty. So there is a framework around local connection. Obviously, there is an element of choice. People can choose to go wherever they want to. If somebody presented to homeless to us, and they didn't have a local connection and they weren't fleeing violence, we would make a referral under the legislation to the area that they do have a local connection with. So there is a statutory framework, but people have a choice, and also other local authorities, particularly London authorities, are struggling with temporary accommodation. So when there's accommodation available in our district, that it is being used.
Any other questions? Sorry, thank you. Thank you, members. If there are no further questions, we've been asked to consider the draft policy and provide initial feedback to lead officers as part of the consultation process being undertaken. Are there any comments members now wish to make? Thank you, members. Can I take it the report has been considered and noted? Could I have a show of hands? Thank you, members. The report has been noted. Thank you, Carly, Caroline and Councillor Bowes-Flint for your attendance this evening. Members, as we do not have any urgent business, that item concludes our meeting for the evening. I will therefore close this meeting of the Corporate Policy Development Committee at 9:08. I'd like to thank all those who have watched this meeting online, and those, actually I would thank those seated in the public gallery, but they're not there. Thank everyone for their attendance. Have a good evening.